All right, let's dive in. Today, we're going to look at a really fascinating shift happening in a subject most of us think we know pretty well: English class. We're going to explore how some very old ways of thinking are giving us brand new ways to understand the books we've been reading for years. So let's get into it. It all really starts with this simple but kind of profound question. When you pick up a book, is there only one right way to read it? For the longest time, the world of literary studies has been guided by a very specific set of rules. But what if there were others? And believe me, this isn't just some abstract thought experiment. This actually happened. Back in March 2026, a group of scholars at the Maharaja Krishnakumarsinhji Bhavnagar University in Gujarat, India, got together for a national seminar to tackle this exact question. They wanted to know how Indian knowledge systems could totally reshape the way we study English. Which brings us to our first big idea. We actually have to question the very foundation of English class as we know it. Because if you think about it, for many of us, that experience was built on a surprisingly narrow set of ideas. The reality is, for decades, English studies has been almost completely dominated by Western literary theories. And what happens when you do that? Well, you create a kind of academic echo chamber where the same frameworks get used over and over again, and that can really limit what we see in a text. So, how did we get here? To really understand why the curriculum looks the way it does, we have to look back at its history. And for many scholars, its roots are tangled up in what they call a colonial legacy. Dr. Kalyan Chattopadhyay, one of the speakers at that seminar, really didn't pull any punches. He basically argued that many English departments today are still running on models they inherited from a colonial era, models that are Eurocentric and use what he calls a banking model of education. So what on earth is this banking model? Well, think of it like this. The teacher just deposits information into a student who's just supposed to sit there and absorb it. The alternative is something called a dialogic approach. It's a two-way street, a conversation, where students and teachers actually build knowledge together. It's a huge shift from just being a receiver to being an active participant. Okay, so if that old model is the problem, what's the solution? Well, this is where things get really interesting. The seminar proposed a powerful answer: unlocking the massive potential of Indian knowledge systems, or IKS. So what exactly is IKS? Well, it's this huge umbrella term for all of the structured philosophies and analytical frameworks that have been developed over centuries on the Indian subcontinent. It's not just a single theory. It's like a whole library of intellectual tools that, for the most part, we just haven't been using. Now, here's a really key distinction they made at the seminar. This isn't just about parampara, which is kind of like tradition that's passed down informally. No, IKS is a system. It's a formalized, rigorous, and analytical set of methods, just as structured as any theory you'd find in the West. And once you start seeing IKS as a proper system, that's when you unlock these incredibly powerful new tools for reading literature, tools that can give us completely fresh takes on even the most familiar books. And this slide just brilliantly shows what we're talking about. So for example, instead of just using Aristotle's idea of catharsis to talk about emotion, you could use Rasa theory to analyze the specific aesthetic emotions a story creates. Or you could use Dhwani to explore all the things a text is suggesting without ever saying it out loud. And Tinai Poetics, that connects a story's entire emotional world to the natural landscape it's set in. How cool is that? And look, this isn't just some abstract, cool-sounding theory. The researchers at the conference were actually doing it. They were showing in real time how these frameworks could be applied to a huge range of literary works, proving just how versatile they are. I mean, just look at the range here. You had scholars reading the classic English poet Wordsworth through the lens of Indian consciousness. They were analyzing Indian novelists with local ways of thinking. They were even using these ideas in translation and for ecological readings of texts. It just goes to show this approach can enrich our reading of both Eastern and Western literature. So what's the big picture? What does this all add up to? Well, the folks presenting at the seminar argued that this whole movement is about building a more balanced, more inclusive, and frankly, a more intellectually exciting future for how we study literature. And this part is absolutely crucial. The speakers were crystal clear that the goal isn't to just throw out Western theory. Not at all. It's about putting these different intellectual traditions into a conversation with each other. It's about creating a richer dialogue where multiple viewpoints can exist side by side. Okay, so that sounds great, but how do you actually make it happen in a real classroom? Well, Dr. Chattopadhyay laid out a really clear, practical roadmap. Step 1, add specific classes on things like Indian poetics. Step 2, actively compare these frameworks with Western ones. And step 3, bring it all to life with hands-on experiential learning, like storytelling and performance. At the end of the day, by embracing all these new tools and perspectives, English studies stops being about a single story told from one point of view. It becomes way more dynamic, more representative of how the whole world thinks, and honestly, a lot more relevant to students everywhere. It's about blowing the doors wide open. And that leaves us with one final thought to chew on. This whole discussion has been about English class, but you could apply this principle to pretty much anything. So take a second and ask yourself, what knowledge systems, what different ways of seeing the world might be missing from your education?